Hi everyone.
Laughing.
Welcome.
That's not good.
Welcome to the Vinh and Ali Show. On this particular episode, we're reviewing the book "The Power of Now" by Eckhart Tolle, and I just sent Ali an email to open the link for this podcast. The title of the email was "This book broke my brain."
I started laughing.
Well, it's just this is one of those books where you know, before you go into an exam and you clearly didn't study for this exam, and then you're in a situation where you're like, all right, hopefully the exam is the exact parts of the book that I actually read and the exact parts of the book that I actually studied for. And then you go into the exam, and then the first question you see, you're like, yeah, I'm screwed. I'm totally screwed for this test. And it's just, I don't know. This was a really hard book for me.
This is one of those books that I've recommended a few times, and it either like really hits and people are like, oh, what a book, changed my life. Or it's one of those books where people are like, what the hell was that? Why did you recommend me this book? It made no sense, and I hate you.
Here's the thing. You sent me into this book with no warning, with no kind of, you gave me no context. So I went into it like, let's go read this book. And then it broke me. It broke me in more ways than one. It just, and look, I just before we get into this, I'm going to take my humble pie hat off for a second.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all right. I'm doing okay in life, right? I'm not, but then when I read this book, I felt like I didn't know anything. I felt the full weight of, you know nothing, Jon Snow. But oh man. Oh,
I love it.
It took me so long to read this book. I had to read it. I read pages over and over again to try to digest what he meant. And then I've taken so many notes that I don't even know how we're going to tackle this podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know where to start either. Like, because I've read this book a few times. And then this time around, I really tried to study it. And I think I went too deep that last night when I was talking to Chantal about it, she's like, so what are you going to talk about? And then my face just went blank and I'm like, I think I've highlighted too much and I actually have no idea what we'll talk about. Well, this could be like a 6-minute podcast. Maybe we just finish up. We're like, great book. Go read it, everyone. Send us some feedback and email so you can help us understand what's truly going on. No, awesome.
Well, look, I guess if we had to talk, how would you describe this book in a sentence?
Okay, so I think ultimately, I don't know if I'll be able to do it in a sentence. I think at its core, the book is about being present and being in the moment. So the core of the philosophy is we either live in the past or we live too far forward in the future. And that, Eckhart Tolle's sort of theory is that if we live in the now, that is kind of the solution for everything. And I just love it because I'm someone that's pretty future focused. So when I read this book, I'm like, there's I don't understand what's going on here, but there's a different way to live. And I want to explore it a little bit. And that's probably what I think the overarching high level principle is. I don't know if you got the same though. I think this was one of those books though, where it's just up to interpretation. Like you could ask 10 people what this book's about and you'll probably get 10 different answers.
And thanks for joining us for the episode of Vinh and Ali Show. That's it. That's all we have to say.
I
have nothing else to add.
Yeah, you're not adding anything to that? What about you? What did you feel? Well, it's your first time. This is your virgin voyage.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you summed it up really well. Just my thoughts as I was reading through this book and as I was going on my first voyage, I really felt like, we talk about through one of the things that we've been working pretty hard on is Recalibrate, a course and a program that we're creating and designing about how to live life. And we've kind of identified there are 6 to 8 buckets in life. You've got your career, your finance, you've got, you've got your family and friends life. So there are many buckets in life. And one of the buckets as well is spirituality. And I think reading this book has made me realize that I'm an absolute noob when it comes to spirituality. And that bucket of mine in my life is extremely empty. And I really know nothing about it. Going through the book and seeing words like enlightenment and being more present. These are just not the words that I've studied or areas that I've studied much at all. I've thought a lot about how to build a business, how to build a career, how to build an online business, an online presence, an online brand. But then when you talk about presence and enlightenment, it's like the sound that comes to mind, that came to mind multiple times is this. I went to an Asian restaurant once, and it was one of those real authentic Asian restaurants. And I asked do you guys do like a vanilla latte? And the waiter looked at me and he just looked really, and he goes, oh, what? And I'm like, a vanilla latte. And then he makes this sound. He goes, huh? And I'll never forget that sound because it was a, huh? It was just, it was like I destroyed his brain because he's never heard of this thing before. It's like, we only got jasmine tea, man. Jasmine or green tea. And then that sound was the sound that I was mentally making throughout the entire process.
Can just imagine you on the plane when you get to certain pages and you're like, what was the sound? You're like, huh?
No, you got to do it right, Ali. It's, huh?
I really didn't commit. It's too early in the morning.
You did commit. Well, look, let's not beat around this virgin bush. Let's dive into this. I think the story that really connected with me right at the start was and if the audience doesn't mind, I'm just gonna read this story to everyone. It's story time, everyone. There was once a beggar who sat on a box by the side of the road for many, many years. Day in, day out, swarms of strangers would pass him on their way, and the beggar did what all beggars do. They asked for money. One day, a traveler was passing through the town, and the beggar shouted, "Please give me some money." And the traveler said, "Sorry, I don't have any money to spare, but I'm curious about your box." "What about my box?" the beggar replied. "Well, what's in it?" The beggar responded, "I don't know. It's just an old box I found here that I've been sitting on for years." Persistent in his inquiry, the traveler asked again, "What was in the box?" And the beggar replied, "I've never looked." And the traveler said, "Why not?" "Because there's nothing in there," the beggar howled back. And the traveler said, "Well, let's just take a look, shall we?" And finally, the beggar opens the box, and amazingly, he finds a treasure box filled with gold, and he's been sitting on it for years and just never knew about it. And the author then says, "What box are you sitting on?" And I guess what he's alluding to there is that all of us have this presence that we're not tapping into. The power of the now that we're not tapping into. Because like you said, I think we can start it off by talking about we tend to live too much in the future. That is me too. I don't live in the past much. Do you, Ali? But for me, I mainly live in the future.
Yeah, I'll probably lean more to the future.
Yeah. And isn't it weird how most of us compulsively live in the future? It's the classic, I will be happy when, I will feel good when, it's going to be a much better place to be when I'm on that holiday at the end of September. So we're just not present. There's a passage here. Let me find this passage. I have so many notes. It's outrageous. Okay, here we go. So one of my notes I wrote, and this is the author talking here. He goes, "How does this mind pattern operate in your life? Are you always trying to get somewhere other than where you are? Is most of your doing just a means to an end? Is fulfillment always just around the corner or confined in short-lived pleasures such as sex, food, drink, drugs, thrills, and excitement? Are you always focused on becoming, achieving, and attaining, or alternatively, chasing new thrills or pleasure? Do you believe that if you acquire more things and that you'll become more fulfilled, good enough, and psychological complete? Are you waiting for a man or woman to give meaning to your life?" And then the note I wrote under it was, "Yes to all this, FFS."
I also feel as you read a couple of these passages that there could be a version where you like narrate this on Audible or do a second version. It's like
but it's
the update.
No, but it's just one of those things where we do live in the future. I mean, I spend so much of my time living in the future, dude.
Yeah. And I think that's why this book has probably grown in such large popularity. Like, I think this is one of those books where Oprah views it maybe as in one of her top 5 books. And for me, when I found this book, it was pretty similar. Like, I was ticking off the achievement boxes, living into the future, making the plans, and then you'd get to the end goal. And it was kind of that notion of, okay, well, I'm there now. Now what? It didn't really tick whatever feeling I was searching for. And then it was then looking for other operating systems. You know, like there's a lot in this book that's very esoteric and it's quite out there, depending on how you interpret it. Then there's a lot in it that's actually quite practical. Like, it's just so simple in the fact that it's like, okay, well, we might want to achieve these things and these outcomes. But this was probably one of the first books that really got me thinking about the journey. And it's like, okay, well, what does it then feel like on the way? And I think he speaks about in other areas of the book, and it's like, okay, well, what is the quality of your consciousness is one of the terms that's used, and that's a pretty abstract term, but to me that means, well, what's the quality of like your thinking, your awareness, levels of joy when you're embarking on certain actions while you are on the journey. And that was just a big kind of practical takeaway that I took away from this book, was just being a little bit more mindful. And you spoke about recalibrate and what we do in that process. I actually think there's lots of that in that process that we now look at executing in our lives, where it's like, okay, well, we'll keep trying to achieve things and take on projects and take actions. But then it's how do you improve the alignment and the quality of those moves?
Well, one of the first things that the author talks about when you want to improve the quality of your life is the realization that you are not your thoughts and you are not your emotions. And that was a pretty big one for me, because that's exactly what I thought I was.
Yeah.
Right? Is that you're saying to me, I'm not my thoughts and I'm not my emotions. And to me, it was like, well, then what the hell am I? and it was just this really weird thing that again, virgin experience. You know, I think a lot of people who are further down the path of spirituality understand the concept that you are not your thoughts, you are not your emotions. But man, it was a scary realization, because I lived my entire life kind of, the way I think is me. And the feelings I feel, yeah, of course that's me. That's who I am. And to be introduced to a concept where that isn't me, and I'm the observer, I've got to practice observing the emotions and observing the thoughts, and you are the observer, not the actual emotion and thinking. That was a radical shift in my mind.
So did you practice that while you were reading it? Did you try and give it a go?
I did. I've done it multiple times now while reading it, and it's a really weird experience.
So what's that feel like?
Well, like the book says, it feels like you're unlocking a higher level of consciousness, right? And I guess I tried doing it while I was journaling as well. And that's what made it really clear for me, because I was just writing about the things I was thinking and trying my hardest not to judge it. Because I think the thing that I always do is I take data and I analyze it. I love analyzing stuff. And and trying to take it a step further and just observing it without analyzing it or judging it, just looking at it, that was one of the hardest things I think I've ever done. But after I successfully have done it a couple of times, you go, oh, wow. It kind of gives you this light, it gives you this separation from what I used to perceive as being me, meaning my thoughts and my emotions. So it gives you this little bit of separation for a few moments, and then you kind of go back to analyzing, well, you're feeling that because you're a piece of shit, right? And then you judge it immediately, and then you go back. But you get that little moment of, and I like to use the analogy of the Matrix. Your mind is literally a matrix, and your emotions is a form of a matrix where you just get drawn back into it. And so you get these moments where you unplug and then you replug into the system. Yeah. So I've felt real brief moments of that higher levels of consciousness, but man, it's a weird feeling.
Yeah. I love it. It's cool reflection. And so when you, in light of that, do you think this is something that you'd practice more, or do you feel like maybe not yet, or what's your kind of thoughts around application?
It's made me aware of my addiction to thinking.
It's interesting.
Yeah, I'm an addictive. I'm an addict to thinking, and there's a note here as well, and I do apologize.
I think most of us are like, and this is, I think he touches on it in the book a few times. It's like, this is probably one of the biggest things that's facing society at the moment, is that we're all conditioned collectively, like we're thinking animals. It's all about progress and achievement and getting there, and you need this product to feel this way, you need to look this way to present, so people like you. Like there's all these things that are so reinforced to us. So I think that's one of the things that this book just kind of helped me with as well. It's like, okay, well, just kind of try to accept it the best you can. It's such a simple saying, but it just is what it is. And I think that's what this book at its core really helped me with, trying to implement into my thinking patterns a little bit more. Because that's the thing that I always find. Like every time I read this book, it just feels like, funnily we've used this term a few times, but it feels like a recalibration. Like I can sit there and then be like, okay, like I'm reading this book right now. How far am I into the future? And what's the quality of my sort of mind patterns and thinking at the moment? And funnily enough, when I read it this time around, I was like, geez, I'm actually a little bit away from what I would call like that center or in that spot. And then it was just more like, and it's just simple. It's like, okay, well, we'll talk about some of the practical things, but there's this great tips in this book. It's like, all right, well, feel your hands, feel your feet. When you breathe into your belly and just slow down for a bit. Don't observe the thoughts. Like it actually gives a lot of like these practical toolkits as checkpoints. And then I'm like, okay, well, how often am I actually doing that right now? And then for me recently, it's like not that much. I'm actually more in the thinking mindset. Like say if you imagine the mind as something that's sort of dragging you around and you're just following it, you're the passenger. Probably being more in that zone rather than being the one that's really the observer, or as the book says. And then, it was just like the last couple of days since we've been reading this, just feels so chilled out again, just from the books. I'm like, wow, hey, good work, Eckhart.
I felt really stressed while reading this book. Yeah, I
felt stressed
effect on me.
after I read it, and then thinking about how we're going to talk about this book, like that was a little bit stressful. Yeah. But no, the actual reading was. Well, I love it. To me, this is like a top 3 book. I'm putting it. It's such a
really.
So yeah.
Well, I think you're more experienced walking down this path, whereas for me, it's the first time I've only started my journey down this spirituality path, and I mean one reason why it was stressing me out was because they use the metaphor in the book as well, where there's nothing wrong with cells dividing in the body, but if cells keep dividing, then it becomes a problem. It becomes a cancer, right? Mm-hmm. And same thing with thinking. Thinking is fine, but then if you overthink, it becomes a cancer. And I love that metaphor because it really shines the light on the fact that we often think ourselves into more suffering and more pain than is necessary. Now that was a big one for me because that's what I do. And I think we live in a world now where when you look at the hierarchy of needs, the most basic of our needs for most of us in the Western countries are met. And now we don't have to worry about food and shelter, etc. So for so many of us now, we live in our minds so much more because we have time to think. And to think of thinking as a disease, oh, wow, is that a brand new concept to me? I always thought of thinking as one of the most valuable things that I do. Because I always looked at thinking as that's what's allowed me to strategize and plan the life that I have. That's what's allowed me to follow a strategy and execute on the strategy that has led me to the life that I'm living. And then for this book to call out thinking as being a disease, I connect with it and I don't connect with it. It's weird because I connect with it because the suffering that I think I've been experiencing in the last, maybe 12 months is overthinking for sure. For sure. It's like another analogy. When you look into the sun for too long, you go blind, right? but you can glimpse at it real quickly. And I think I've just been looking in the sun for too damn long. I've been thinking too much about life in the future and not just living right now. Yeah, it's a weird one.
I think there's a couple of parts to that though, too. Like obviously there's, and he touches on it in the book, where it's when you're thinking about the future and you can't really act on it, that's different to planning and taking, call it creative action in the present moment. And when I actually, like, just as your friend, like watching you do things, I actually think that a lot of your thinking, you do hit the higher points of, like, call it creativity that comes from that present moment action, right? Like when you actually break it down, like you spend a lot of time sort of in your workshop, in your study, like writing, creating, developing. And I think that getting into the, call it that flow state, which I would say in this, it's like you're using the mind as a tool and it's alignment. Like it's not really dragging around. But then there's probably that other side of the thinking where it might be around worrying about certain things playing out, overthinking dialogues in your head that you can't really do anything about. Like I think that's what the book kind of touches on. Not that thinking is like a disease overall, but it's, are you using that thinking, call it, with a quality of present moment awareness versus is it just thinking that's running through your head that's causing like stress or anxiety that you can't really do anything about? And that's kind of what I got from it. Like, because it was one of the things I remember when I first read it. I'm like, so what? Do I just turn my brain off? Like, is that what this book is telling me to do? And I'm like, but then when sort of dug a little bit deeper, it's like, no, you still use the tool for solving problem, like for taking actions, for creating, for doing things that you love or whatever it is. But it's like, you can also then slow it down. Like it can go into idle as well. Like if we use the car analogy a little bit, it's like you don't have to have the accelerator just pedal to the metal all the time. You can sit there in neutral for a little bit and then accelerate just when you need to. So that was one of the things I remember taking a note about, that it's not about just fully to stop the thinking mind, but just to be more a bit aware and conscious of how am I using that tool.
What you're saying is, well, you just said it. It's about learning how to use the tool and not have the tool use you, right? Whereas if you think about it, often when we're overwhelmed by our own thoughts, is it you controlling the thoughts or is the thoughts controlling you? And I think often it's the thoughts controlling us.
Yep.
There's a really interesting point where the author makes where, you just touched on it now, and I want to continue with that thought path of the past and the future. We tend to either live in the past or the future. And this is the bit that really won me over, where he talks about how the only moment that truly exists is the now. Even when you think about the future is you thinking in the now about a now that's going to occur later.
That's right.
Right? And then the past is you bringing up in the now a moment that was in the past. So everything happens in the now. The future is a future now that's hasn't happened yet. And the past is a now that has already happened.
Yeah.
And then that was the moment where I went, okay, this isn't all kind of woo-woo and crazy. That's actually a really good point.
Yeah.
And so what that means is then the only control that we truly have, and like I've always heard people say this, and I always kind of at a surface level understood it, and where people say the only thing you have control over is the present. And that kind of thought process helped me understand, okay, so that's why this is the only moment in which we have control over. We only have control over now. We don't have control over future now or past now, just now. And future now and past now is just us in the now thinking about it. And it just went... I'm getting a headache.
I was thinking how that would read if we transcribed it.
I don't know. I feel a headache coming. I think someone get me an aspirin. Oh man,
I love it. But I think you're right though. As funny as that sounds, the logic really does hold up. And again, people like if no one understands what the hell we're talking about, and if you just tuned in. You're right though. Like even when we're planning for the future, we're planning for it right now. right? When we're thinking about the past, we're thinking about it right now. And that was the logic of that really does hold up. I remember when I read it, I was like, yeah, that's true. Like, he makes a good point. There's only the only moment that can be, I think that's one of the lines in the book, the only moment that can be experienced truly is the now. It's this moment right now. But then most of the time, we never give this current moment any real attention. Like, I think that's the difference. And even when, I don't know how much this is backed up by science, and we're no doctors and we're not psychologists and all of that, but I think even when you see nowadays, like just the increase of, say, anxiety and certain mental health conditions, I wonder if that is related to the gap between what people are just feeling, between what's real and what's now versus what's in the past. And that, like, as that gap widens, like I find it even in myself, like even after trying to practice this stuff for a fair few years now, it's sometimes you just get too far detached from this moment and you're just so, either in the past or the future. And even though I can sometimes be aware of that feeling, it's still very difficult to then get back when you are in that state of future or past. And
with the gap that you speak of, with the gap that you speak of, I mean, there's a passage here, right? Where, and the reason I think I'm referring to the passages a lot here is because, man, I've just got my training bicycle, like my training wheels are on. So I'm just going to redirect from it instead of trying to interpret it, because it's just going to, Now, he talks about this fear from this point of view, where he goes, this kind of psychological fear is always something that might happen, not of something that is happening right now. You are in the here and the now, while your mind is in the future. And this gap creates what's known as an anxiety gap. And if you're identified with your mind and you've lost touch with the power and simplicity of the now, the anxiety gap will be your constant companion. So you constantly feel anxious. And he goes, you can always cope with the present moment, but you cannot cope with something that is only a mind projection. You cannot cope with the future, but you can cope with the now. And it's weird. It's like when you think about when people are suffering, and even when I'm suffering, we think things like, even while we're in the moment of feeling this, we go, how am I going to be able to live moving forward? Because this thing's happened. How am I going to be able to move on? And then when you think about it, well, you are going through it. You are actually coping with it. It's just when you start to remove yourself from the now and think, how am I going to deal with it tomorrow, that it causes you more pain in the present. That is just really interesting, that it's the gap that causes us the anxiety. Is when you live too much in the future, that's when it creates all of that anxiousness. And the fact that we can cope in the present, like that was another little one where I'm like, I think I'm hanging on to the monkey bars, right? I think I'm grasping it, but it's true. In a sense that if you really focus on the moment, regardless of how hard things are at times, we're coping. It's just when you start to live outside of that, you go, oh, I don't know how I'm going to be able to get through my day tomorrow. Yeah.
Well, it asks a great question in the book. I don't know if you reflected on it. It's like, if you're really present right now in the moment, and I ask you the question, well, what problem do you have right now? Like, say if you're going second by second, like right now, like you might have 5 things you have to deal with in 2 hours time. But right now, while we're sitting here and we're doing this podcast, if I ask you the question, like, what problem do you have right now? Do you have a problem?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I think it's a great question, because I think, like, logically, like right now in this second, right, this moment, as I'm using words to speak to you right now, I don't think I can concurrently have a problem. I might have a problem in an hour, or like in 2 weeks.
My mind is trying to answer the question. My mind's sort of, yeah, you got problems, man. You got health problems. You got 99 problems, and then it just wants to get into it. You know what's really freaking me out?
You're like, him asking me this question is a big problem right now.
Yeah, well, that's right. You know what's really freaking me out? What's freaking me out is this author saying that my mind is like my enemy. And it's making me fight this internal battle right now. I'm starting to feel crazy. Where it's like, shut up, mind. You just be present, be in the body, and it's just.
Well, I was like, nah,
sorry,
man.
Let's not do it. Let's not do it. Let's not do it. This is watching a virgin during their first time, just freaking out with everything during sex. Just like, what am I meant to be doing? What am I meant to be doing? Where do I put my hands? It's just no idea what you're doing here. Apologize to everyone in advance for this. They're just experiencing a virgin having sex for the first time on audio. It's terrible.
That's one of your most interesting analogies. I love it. I love that this is where this book has taken you, to that level of first timeness.
I'm so uncomfortable. I've never been more uncomfortable on a podcast with you, because on most podcasts, I feel like I know where I'm going. I know where I'm going. There's a structure to this. I've got notes. Whereas right now, everything, Ali, is just chaos.
Hey, that's what this podcast is about. We learn live on audio and video with our audience. Man. So this is a beautiful moment.
Kids,
it's cool. It's cool exploring these concepts. But yeah, I love what you said there as well. Like when you're talking about the gaps and the anxiety gap, call it, and then what that actually looks like. Like the book, then in other parts, it talks about things like forgiveness and surrender. And so much about that is then around, okay, well, just as you were saying that, like so much about the book is about bridging that gap and then giving you active toolkits, I think, as you bridge it, right? Like, so say, for example, you have a problem or you have a situation, he calls them life situations. I love that.
We'll dig into that a bit more. Dig into that a little bit more. Life situation.
So I think there's two things that he looks at just from memory, where it's like, okay, what we perceive, as our identity and like say our work, our house, our families, all these things, they're largely what he calls the outer world, which is our life situation, right? Mm-hmm. And then in his view, our life is actually just being alive. It's being consciousness or whatever being alive is. And then it's nearly about separating and knowing that, okay, there's the inner world, which is how we live, call it, breathe, stay alive, sleep. And then there's the outer world, which is our life situation, and just having that delineation that, they're nearly two entities. So that sometimes your life situation might not be ideal, right? Like you're having a fight with your boss, or a relationship's not great, or you're experiencing grief. That's part of your life situation. That's an outer world kind of thing. But then the way that you process that, how you navigate through it, how much you're in the moment.
Can I butt in for 2 seconds and just say that I think there's a confusion that I tend to have about when I think, oh man, my life sucks, and rephrasing it to my life situation sucks, not my life, right? I don't suck. I'm not a terror. Like it's just this life situation. I think what that reframe does is it allows you to contextualize it and understand that it's just this moment in time and this situation that sucks. So again, time and time again, what I'm hearing even from you now is that it's that separation. It's being able to just separate from situations, from negative experiences, from emotions, from thoughts. It's that separation. It's the unplugging of the matrix. It's just getting out of that.
Yeah, well, it's watching the matrix rather than being fully embedded inside it, right? Like a lot of what the book really speaks about is that you become the observer of your thoughts, right? Like I think he uses the word that you become like the silent watcher as these thoughts arise. And sometimes that's actually a pretty cool process. I know we've done this a few times where we've just been chilling out and it's like, all right, you see the thoughts sort of come into your mind and, and rather than letting them take hold and then you're just thinking about that thought for 40 minutes, and not really coming to a resolution. An alternative way is that thought sort of passes by. Yeah, you smile at it, you give it a wave and you let it pass on. And when the time is to actually act on it or do something about it, that's the time that you approach it. Or the other one, and I think he uses a couple of different models there where it's like, okay, well, you have a few different options, right? Like when thoughts arise, and especially really difficult thoughts, you can either choose to take action and then act on it immediately, right? Like he kind of goes on, well, can you do something about that thought right now? Then if not, then maybe you can just accept it, right? Like you accept it, the situation as it is, and you don't identify with it and you just let it exist, right? Which is nearly a mode of surrender, or you leave. You get away from it. You get the hell away from that thought or whatever that situation is and leave it as it is. And I think that's a pretty cool, simple model. Like, it doesn't obviously address everything there.
3 things.
Yeah, but it's like a 3-step kind of model just with dealing with thoughts. And then the idea is that from there you get into a more peaceful state where you can actually take a better quality of action potentially as well from that position. Like, if you think about when we're really reactive and highly stressed out, like, it's really hard to make good moves, right, from that position. Like, how often when you're feeling a little bit on edge, like, you'll drop something, like you'll have a little car accident, or like, these things always happen. It feels like when your mind is in that more elevated state, rather than if you're in a fully chilled position.
So again, that toolkit is you either solve it, you either leave it, or you accept it.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's why the power is in the now, because in the now is when you actually can solve it, or you can leave it, or you can accept it. You can't do those 3 things in the future, and you can't do those 3 things in the past.
Yeah.
And that's why, again, the power of the present and the now is that the reason why it's so powerful is because that's when you can act. That is the only time when you can act on your problems. And those are really the only 3 paths when you really think deeply about it. Because I started putting some of my own examples in my life through this little model, and I thought, it's so true. Because those are the only 3 options that are ever present to us. And it is in the avoidance of doing one of these 3 things that causes pain. It's when we avoid the problem. It's when we don't try to solve it. We don't leave it, and we just kind of don't accept it.
Yep.
That resistance is what creates the suffering.
And then over time, without doing any of those moves, it just keeps building up, right? So it gains momentum and power inside
and
your
then
mind.
more. And then you've got more of these. It's not just one unread email that you're not, because it's like having emails that you can either, again, solve. You can solve, you can leave it, or you can accept it. Instead of doing any of that, you just leave it unread. Now you've got 4 million emails.
And they all had to be answered 4 days ago.
Oh,
that's kind of what, and that's when I think people feel overwhelmed, right? Like, when they have so many of these, call it life situations, they just build up.
Yeah.
And they haven't been processed, they haven't been accepted, they haven't been embraced, they haven't been solved, they haven't been forgiven, they haven't been let go of. And then we sit there and we feel, it just feels like such a big weight, and it's always circulating around us. And I think that's why, we speak about it we've spoken about it a few times, like journaling, putting things into lists that you don't look at, like having some of these toolkits where you can get that out of your head and into some sort of approach. Another cool practical application of this.
An example of this that I'm going through in my life is that, like, Pei Wen and I have always been thinking about, do we get another house? Do we buy our dream home? And it's funny, because if we looked back 10 years ago, the house we're living in now, this is our dream home. And it's society's constant desire for more. There's that story that I've told you many times, but I'd love to share with our listeners. And it's something my dad shared with me that my dad learned from Buddhism. And it's like, this monk was sitting with a student, and this monk has 4 cups. He's got a plastic cup, he's got a glass cup, he's got a styrofoam cup, and then he's got a metal cup. And then he pours tea into each one of those cups. And then he tells the student, take the glass cup and drink the tea. Just notice how it tastes. He goes, okay, interesting. Now take the styrofoam cup and drink the tea and tell me, how does it taste? And then now take the plastic cup and drink it. How does it taste? And then the metal cup, and how does it taste? And how does the tea differ in all these cups? And the student says, it doesn't taste different at all. It all tastes the same. And then the teacher says to the student, we obsess over the cups. We want a fancier and better cup. And then we miss the point of life. The point of life is to enjoy the tea. It's not about getting a better cup every single time. And the cup symbolizes a better house, a better car, better clothes. And I think the problem that Wen and I go through is that we get sucked into the world of desire and cravings of always wanting a better cup. And we don't apply the 3 rules there. We either accept, okay, let's just get a better cup, or we don't go with, no, we're going to leave it. And then we don't try to solve that problem. We just kind of get stuck in, and we never make a decision with it. We're just always in this constant, I don't know, do we get a better one? Don't we? Do we? And then it just always is it's taking up cognitive space and cognitive capacity all the time. And I think recently, I've just started journaling about it and realizing that I have to make a decision in the now. That we have to make a choice to no longer be obsessed over the cup. To go, I'm just going to leave it. And look, I know that thought of getting another house is going to creep back into my head at some point. But in the last couple of weeks, Wen and I making the decision that we're no longer going to be looking, I've felt so much better, because instead of at night always going onto realestate.com.au and continually scrolling through and looking at houses, I've now freed up that time and space to actually play with my son.
Yeah.
But I've had to use that model to go, you know what? We're leaving it. I'm leaving it. And I know that's going to creep back in. I bloody know it. But it's just in the time and space that I've been able to create just by making that decision to leave it. Damn it, that was powerful.
Yep. I love that. I think even when you were saying that, I think the cup and the tea analogy is really cool, because what that really to me felt like was about alignment. Right, like when you're thinking about that, it might not necessarily even be about like how nice the house is or what it feels like. It's like kind of aligning the tea with the cup, right? Because you don't want to sit there drinking the tea and then worrying, oh, geez, did we spend too much on the cup? Was the cup a little bit too extravagant? You just want to kind of drink the tea, like, or you don't want to be drinking the tea being like, oh, this cup's pretty dirty. Am I going to get sick from drinking tea from this cup? So again, if you go back to the concept in this book, it's kind of like, well, how do you get firstly into the point where you're actually positioned well enough to be able to enjoy the tea? And then from there, if you can just kind of accept the cup for what it is, whether it's a new cup, an old cup, a different cup, someone else's cup, then you have that freedom to kind of to experience that cup in whatever way you choose to at that moment. Whereas, say if we go by the book and it's like, call it the more mind, the mind identified state, which is like the crazy sort of mind where you're like questioning the cup and you're going like, is this the right cup? Did we spend too much on the cup? It's like, as soon as that condition exists, I think it's automatically going to be really hard to enjoy the tea. Right. So when you were saying that, I'm like, well, there's no necessarily right or wrong answer. Like in this case, you came to the end conclusion that where I'm at right now, call it for that karma. Like the way that you finished that off, like you found peace at the moment by not worrying about changing the cup.
Well, by leaving
right? That was by leaving the cup for now, right? And that might have just been you weighing up all the different things that are going on in your life or whatever it is. And it's like, well, right now, maybe this cup or changing the cup isn't the move. We need to just wait. Well, I'm going to enjoy the now by playing with Xander, because I don't want to, because that's the other thing, right? Like with that type of cup change as well, like buying a house is a big thing. It's like you have to sell, maybe you might need to sell your current house. You then have to find a new one. You have to go through the process. You've got to get furniture. You've got to make so many different decisions that are ultimately going to take bandwidth in the now at some point.
Well, it's the reason why I decided to leave it is because as I was journaling, what I realized was what I'm in now is what I once said I wanted. And then I'll get what I want now. And then in 10 years' time, I will want something else. Mm-hmm. So I'm not solving the deeper problem here. It's the classic thing you hear about. You're just going to be, you'll still be the same person, just in a different cup. You'll still be suffering from the exact same issues, thinking that the cup is the solution, right? It's one of the, another classic example is in relationships, right? And when, we won't mention any names here and call out our friends, but we've got friends as well that think to themselves that when I find the right person, that's going to solve all of my problems. And then they get in the relationship and then nothing changes. And then because they don't realize that they're not solving the root of the problem. And tying it back to this book, what the author is saying is that the root of all evil is that we are not living in the present. We are not learning to be more present. And we're not willing to do the hard work because it's bloody hard work. Like you know, we're texting each other back and forth. Like, how hard is it to be present? Or while we're reading this book and trying to do the experiments of being more present.
Hence we're texting each other because we're being distracted from reading the book.
Yeah, but it's not, if you don't do some of this internal work, it doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter how many things you have. It doesn't matter how nice your house is. You know, I feel like to think that wealthy people don't suffer, that's one of the biggest illusions that there is ever, right? In that, if you don't start doing some of this internal work first, getting that new place, it doesn't increase your enjoyment. Whereas I think if you do some of that internal work, and then maybe once you've kind of fixed some of the things that are going on inside, maybe then it helps you to be able to then enjoy the place if you do get it, right? I don't think it's about not getting it. It's just about not using that as a quick fix.
Yep, for sure. And even when you think about just the world at the moment, like say, call it the first world and the developing world even, I think being present in the moment and like connected to everything that is, call it in the now, is actually a lot more difficult probably in the first world. Whereas in the developing world, you spoke about that hierarchy of needs. Like if you are living sort of more worrying, you know, like if the big focus is around food, air, shelter, clean water, automatically present moment awareness is probably going to be a lot stronger. You know, connectedness to your family and your tribe is going to be a lot stronger. Whereas I think in the world that we might live in, and you mentioned there, even call it like people that are very successful or wealthy, I think that detachment of reality becomes nearly bigger. So you're right. Like we speak to a lot of people that on paper are very successful, but then when you dig a bit deeper, you see just deep levels of dissatisfaction and unhappiness even there.
You know, one of the things that really, really stood out and was almost scary reading this in the book was that the author talks about how the reason why the human race seeks out drugs, alcohol, short forms of pleasure, right? You know, whether it's food, sex, whatever, is because we're trying to escape for a moment that mind of ours that is always active, always controlling, always manipulative, right? That's why we seek out those momentary breaks where we just, otherwise the author wrote, if human beings didn't have some kind of escape and didn't seek that kind of escape, we would just all explode. You know, we would all just fall apart. And it was just a scary thought that I never thought of the mind as being that, dude. You know, but I can see how and I think one of the biggest realizations I've had in this book is that I create my own suffering, man. That is just so bonkers. That I'm causing my own pain, dude. Like I used to think other people are creating my own pain. Life situations and circumstances create my pain. But and again, I'm only just starting to grasp this one. And what I'm grasping is that I am the creator of the suffering in my own life, which means I am also the person that can release myself of this suffering.
Yeah.
That's messed up.
Just as you were saying that, I remember a note that I had from one of the first readings. It's like when my brain is telling me that I'm awesome and everything is awesome, you know, like the Lego movie, like everything is awesome.
Good song. It's good song.
It's like, then there was like the second part of the note. It's like, maybe it's not awesome and this is a trick. It's like the second part to that, where... And it's like the book just completely changed it. Like all those things that gave me those dopamine hits where I'm like, oh my God, Ali, that move was just amazing. You genius. Like, how did you pull that off? It's like, hey, wait a second. This could be a trap. And this could lead me. We should go celebrate by having 15 beers. Like, this is a great. It's like, hey, wait a second, that doesn't sound like good advice, but hey, we did the last move together, so why not? And I just started imagining, like, you know, it's nearly like, I don't know, the angel and the devil mentality, where you've got like this one. It's like, oh, we should all be present and zen, and then there's like the ego side, which is like, hey, let's go do some cool shit. It'll be so much fun, and then we'll sort it out later. It's fine. And you're right. It can sometimes, these types of books can cause that conflict where it's like, okay, well, I'm getting a thought right now. Is that present, or call it, you know, Zen version of me, or is this ego version that's about to go make some messed up move that we're going to have to solve later? And I think that's a really, really challenging part with potentially making the transition to apply some of the things from this book, because it's nearly like ignorance is bliss, right? In some ways. But then on the other side, is there a massive benefit if you find some of the beauty in the lessons in these books, because it can enhance, call it the life situation stuff that we were talking about before?
I still, somewhere in my head, feel like if I was always present,
yep,
I'd be a potato. Do you know? I'm again, virgin talking here. I just feel like I'd just be a potato. Okay.
Whatever that line was, I want Peter to cut that. That is genius. Virgin talking here. I am a potato. It's like just that as a soundbite. Perfect. That is perfect. That is the moment of the podcast. I think we're 35 episodes in. That is it. That's the bit I want, like on repeat in my headphones.
There may be no other podcast that we ever do after this one, because I've just become a potato.
A virgin potato.
Yeah, a virgin potato. Dude, but just real
you go to pay rent after this, and you're like, hey, pay rent, I want to tell you something. I've just realized. What?
Stop everything. Stop.
Yeah. What?
Paywen made this potato dish the other night where she boiled potatoes, and then she took the potatoes and then she crushed the potatoes. So she flattened the little mini potatoes. She flattened them. Then she drizzled them with garlic oil, and then she popped them into the oven and then made them all nice and crispy. And then we took the crispy smashed potatoes and then dipped it in just a range of amazing sauces, and unbelievable.
I was there.
Unbelievable.
It was amazing.
Oh, you were there. Oh, yeah, you were there. It was so good that I forgot your presence. And I was so in the moment of now. I went, oh God, that was so yummy.
It's the first time you've spoken about one of these dishes where I'm not feeling envy or jealousy, because I was actually there and I got to experience it. And then remember, there was just normal standard roast potatoes, and they were just getting neglected off to the side.
The dumbest way to eat potatoes ever. I'd never want to eat potatoes like that ever again, because the crisp and the garlic infused oven baked crunchiness of the potato dipped in sauce and then light sprinkles of salt. So yummy. Sorry, you just talked about potatoes, made me thought about potatoes. No. But we see, to me, I think when I eat really yummy food, I do get really present in the moment. And the reason I brought this up is that, I mean, it's like everything. We always have the same conclusion. We need to make a shirt, because it's always about both. You know, look, I'm at a stage in my life where I'm 35, turning 36. I don't think that I always want to be always and forever present right now in my life. I think inevitably I'm going to fall victim to my mind using me. Damn you, mind. And then I know that I'm going to be able to use my mind as well. And then I'm also going to try to find more moments of being present, because I know that I'm definitely not being present enough. But if I just adopt this and then I'm present all the time, I'd just be a bland potato.
Yeah. You want to be a smashed, dipped in oil,
crispy, dipped in oil, oven baked, dipped in multiple different sauces. Yeah.
Just be raw, unpeeled. Pantry potato, which is so sad. Such a sad visual.
So sad. I mean,
no, but I love that. I think that's the beauty about this. And the book doesn't tell us, right, that you have to denounce your identity and just be completely monk-like. You know, I think the beauty of this book that I found is you can take certain ingredients from it and then just play around with them and see. Like one of my favorite lines in the book, where it has just like these random questions to get you to reflect. And it's like, well, one of the tools that you can use for presence is just like, even like I just remembered it just then, and I was thinking about it while you were speaking. It's like, can you feel any energy in your body right now? You know, like consciousness in your body while you're just doing something really normal. Right now, that doesn't mean that we're now denouncing, like, it doesn't mean that we have to sit here and meditate for 45 minutes quietly to feel presence. It just means that while you're listening or while you're engaging in a conversation, can you feel like your hands tingling? Or can you feel your breath at all? And I'm like, something that simple like that. I love that, just while you're going through just normal things, like whether it's playing with the kids or having a meeting. And when I remember that little line, it just enhances the quality of that experience a little bit more than if I'm in a 1 hour meeting and then at the end of it, it just feels like that 1 hour just flew by and I was just so attached to whatever was happening in there and what I wanted out of the meeting and what the outcomes of the meeting were meant to be. And it's like these little shifts where you can take small ingredients from these types of teachings. You can just play around with them, experiment, then see, okay, does that improve your experience on a day-to-day basis? And then for some people, it'll be like, nah, that felt weird. Don't want to do it. I'm not ready for it yet. It's completely fine too. And I think that's what I love. I love what you said before. It's always about finding the middle, finding what works, what you want to play around with.
Well, that means that the way to practice being more present, what you're saying is, and what the author's saying is, to continually ask yourself the questions. Can I feel, can I feel my finger? And I tell you what, I rarely ask myself any of those questions. And therefore, when I reflect back on my life, I don't think I feel my body at all because I am so engrossed in my mind. I'm so, like, all of the energy that I have lives here. It lives in my head. I barely, and you always say this, every time we do meditations together, you're always like, feel the tingling in your fingers. I'm like, I can't even feel my fingers.
I have no hands.
I have no hands. I have, like, I'm nothing but my thoughts and my emotions. That's all I am, and it's so interesting that, again, just such brand new concepts to me that when you just sit there and ask yourself these questions over and over and over again, it forces you to be more present. It really does, because it makes you more aware. And I remember Craig, one of our good friends, Craig, he's my videographer and I love the guy. He's one of my best mates. And he loves physics, and you just wouldn't guess it because when you look at him, you're like, this guy doesn't know nothing about physics. And he just loves physics, loves space and everything, and is
really surprised when Craig started talking about like astrophysics and science.
I know.
It's like first I saw him squirt like half a bottle of sauce on a meat pie, and then he's like, while he's chewing, he's like, just like talking about Einstein's theory of relativity and stuff, and I'm like, didn't see that coming. So shout out to Craig.
See that guy. He's got like got an eyebrow ring, and he was wearing a cap, and he looks like a skater boy, and then he just opens his mouth and talks about quantum physics. And I'm like,
it's like, so Harley, do you want to go see like Neil deGrasse Tyson at the upcoming show? I'm like, what? Like, yeah, right.
The number of times where he talks, and I'm like, huh? It's just outrageous. I've done it so many times. And well, he told me about something called the quantum Zeno effect, right? And that is the effect where if you, and I'm going to butcher this, but when you constantly observe something, the thing you observe, it doesn't react. It just freezes, or it changes the way it reacts, right? And upon observing something, it impacts the way it moves, it whatever. Okay, see, I know nothing about quantum physics, but what I'm trying to say there is that the more you observe your thoughts and your actions, that actually has an impact. It actually has an impact. So it's important to, if you want to be present, continually ask yourself the questions: what am I thinking? What am I feeling? And then resist. Don't analyze it. Just go, oh, those are the thoughts. And I love the metaphor you gave right at the start, because this has helped me so much, Ali, in this process, where now I just look, I go, what am I thinking? Oh, that's what I'm thinking. And then I just wave goodbye to it. That simple little mind hack you gave me, I go, oh, I'm feeling a little bit frustrated at the moment. Oh, that's interesting. And you just wave goodbye to it. It's all good. Okay, that's cool. That's a cool thought. All right, whatever. And that has changed it all for me. In when there are moments where I start to feel really overwhelmed, and there are moments where I can feel some of that anxiety coming in because I'm thinking too much about the future, I just immediately go to the question: what am I thinking? What am I feeling? Wave goodbye to it. And then on top of that, like what you just mentioned now, to really reiterate the toolkit for people, is to go, oh, can I feel my hands? Can I feel my feet? And just go into your body. And I mean, the author spent a whole chapter talking about this, but that's the importance of going into your body and not using all of the energy that you have in your head, but directing some of it down into your body. And when you direct it down into your body, that is how you become more present. That's why I guess in meditation, what you're focusing on is the breath. You know, taking that deep breath in and then feeling your diaphragm. And then the moment you do that and you go into your body, guess what? There's not much thinking happening.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I got to explain to me a few years ago by someone like the actual science behind meditation. And it was the first time that, like, I always thought that meditation was just about, you know, like having no thoughts and just breathing. And it felt very sort of, you know, esoteric and out there. And then somebody was explaining the actual science, and they were talking about like how we have different types of brain waves that go through our mind. And they use the analogy of, you know, our brain can be as wild as like an ocean where there's 60-foot waves crashing, or it can be as still as a steady stream, right? Where you're completely at peace and there's nothing going there. And the thing is like all of that is around observing what's going on in the mind right now. But when the waves are crashing and you're in a 60-foot storm, it's really, really hard to turn that into a stream. Like you have to wait for that to subside, to paddle out. You potentially need medication. You need other toolkits. You need, you know, a bigger boat to get you through that storm, to get you out of it. But you can then go down those levels. So like even when you think about the core concept behind mantra meditation, where you just repeat the same word over and over in your head, that the science behind that is that it just steadies the stream. And then after a while, if you do that, most people recommend for 20 minutes or so, and you really focus in on those one words, the thoughts, those 60-foot waves, they just keep subsiding. And then the longer you practice it for, then, you know, you might have 2-foot waves that you can easily turn into a stream rather than 60-foot waves. So it's like people say, yeah, like most people that you speak to, very similar to working out and going to the gym. They'll be like, yeah, I meditated for a while. And then it just either got too boring or I didn't need it anymore or whatever. Like I found myself when I'm like, oh yeah, I don't really need to meditate today or whatever. It usually means that I do need to meditate even more because I'm now identified more with the bigger waves. And then I'm not really going from that calm stream position. So that's just a way, like a really cool kind of toolkit that I learned a while ago around thinking of your mind and your thoughts in terms of the severity of the waves that are occurring at the moment. And then using the presence or journaling or meditation or therapy or whatever it is that you need to then see if you can then lower those waves. But I love things where you nearly have, like, especially things that are a bit subjective and out there. I like things where you can put in some type of measurable or metric around it, or having little frameworks just to do a quick self-analysis. You know, like we were talking a bit before about those questions, like you ask yourself these questions as little check-ins to see where you're at. The wave analogy is a pretty cool kind of scorecard just to see, okay, what does it feel like right now?
You gave me a new way of looking at meditation, and it's that, and I mean, I know you do it all the time, and you've been really good with it. Me, not so much, because I'm addicted to thinking, and what's given me clarity is that the reason I don't meditate is because I'm addicted to thinking, and for me, doing something that doesn't allow me to think for 10 to 15 minutes is frightening. It's just, well, why would I do that? I could be thinking. Why not think? I mean, I love thinking. Thinking is great. Thinking is addictive. Thinking feels good. So then as a result of that, I don't engage in it. But what I've learned and I've reframed in this podcast right now is that if I meditate, I will be able to use my mind more as opposed to having it just use me. Whereas when I don't give my mind breaks and I don't observe it, then I get lost in it. But the more I observe it, it means I pull out and I'm on top of it. Otherwise, if I get too far in, then it's on top of me. And meditation is the process of you just getting on top of it so that you use your mind as the tool. The mind doesn't use you as the tool. And that frame now makes me more excited to meditate.
Yeah.
Whereas
that's
I
how
never
I
had
tricked
that
myself
before.
as well. It was the same
Really?
for me. I'm like, yeah, I'm like I got into this to enhance my thinking and creativity.
Yeah.
Because so much of the research was showing that, okay, like if you do meditate and journal and you do these things, it's going to improve the quality of your thinking. So when I started off that journey, it was around enhancing the quality of those moves that I'd actually apply in my world. It wasn't, because it was a search for peace or enlightenment or anything like that. It was just the practical form of, okay, how can I use this tool, which is the mind, better as a bit of an optimizer? So, and then after a while, when you experiment with it, then you start seeing, all right, are there practical benefits? Like, because then I started measuring it too. I'm like, okay, on days when I meditate, do I make better decisions, or do I go through the day better? Are my interactions of a high quality? Because that's the other part is like when you're using the logical side of your brain, it's like, okay, well, will that investment of 20 minutes give me any return? Because the first few times I did, I'm like, oh, well, I don't know. Nothing's really happened. And it's like a bit like going to the gym, right? Like I did 6 bicep curls. Well, I don't have big guns right now. What's going on?
So confusing.
Obviously, meditation doesn't work and the gym doesn't work either.
I've come to the same conclusion.
Yeah. And then people are like, oh yeah, no, you just like, and then there's also extreme, like if you even think about things like steroids, right? They're just ways to get that outcome quicker. Like say on this side of the world, it's probably doing hallucinogenics or doing magic mushrooms or whatever. You just get to fast track that outcome. You get a glimpse into what it might be like, but it might not be very sustainable. So yeah, I think that's our little jam on meditation. The other cool thing in the book is that there's probably 5 or 6 different types of meditation that he just throws away as little paragraphs inside the book, but I just love them. Like, I don't know if you
walk
took
us
notes. Do you have notes on them? I've got so many notes, I can't even find it on my phone. Do you have them there or not?
Well, yeah, I've got one of them. I don't have all 5, but I think I took note of this one because it.
All right, I've got one here.
I've got one too. Who goes first?
You go first.
Okay.
I can see it in your eyes.
Well, the reason I got excited over this is that I tried it and it was
awesome.
Yeah, I'll talk you through my experience. So essentially the meditation is when you wake up in the morning, the first thing you do is get yourself into a comfortable position, whether you're sitting or you're laying down, and then just start to feel each individual part of your body. Start to just take your focus and put it all into your feet. And just really feel how your feet feels. Feel every single cell if you can. Go to that little, tiny little part. Just feel every single toe, feel the ball of your feet, and then start to feel your calves, and then up to your knee, and then feel your thighs, and then feel your bum, and then just feel every single part of your body. And as you're doing that, really just when you're feeling, you're not thinking. You're just in your body and you're not in your mind. And he says, after you've felt every single part of your body, then just focus the energy as a wave going from the top of your head down to your toes, up to the top of your head, up and down, up and down, up and down. And then just feel yourself as one whole body. Right? And so I read it and I went, when I read it, I was like, what the hell is this? This is the weirdest thing I've ever come across. But I'm trying to adopt the mindset. Don't judge it. Just try it.
What does that sound at the beginning?
Calm down. Just calm down. Yeah. You see, you don't get the sound right, Ali. You got to put it.
I felt like I felt like we were in harmony there. I just added a different type of sound. Also,
it's different. It's different.
You just got to accept different sounds.
No, okay. I don't want
There's not a one correct type of sound.
Don't ruin that sound for me, Ali. There's only one way to make that sound. It's the way I make it.
Oh, apologies to everyone listening.
I'm so sorry, everyone. But you see, so when I took myself through that, the most astonishing, I mean, it's meant to be a healing meditation. What he was saying is that when you do this, you actually help your body heal. And that's, again, that's when it went a little bit woo-woo for me. But while I did it, the best thing I got out of it, took me about 10, 15 minutes. The best thing I got out of it was that I wasn't thinking. I maybe spent 5% of my energy cognitively just thinking through, okay, I'm going to feel my hands now. All right. And that's it. Whereas it felt like all of my mental energy, and it's weird to say it's your mental energy, but it was all in my body. And when I got out of that, my mind just felt refreshed because I wasn't thinking. And that's when it felt like I was on top of my mind as opposed to my mind was on top of me. Right? I felt the benefit of that. Healing or not, I'm sure you have to do it for a lot before you experience some of that healing powers. But I just felt extremely calm for about 5 minutes before my mind came rushing back in and going, you've got to do this today. You've got this to do today. Hey, have you prepared for that? And it just went crazy. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome.
What about your meditation? What's
no, that was one. I had the same one. I liked.
You had the same one? Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I found another one here. Right, so there's another one pretty similar here, where it's follow the breath with your attention as it moves in and out of the body. So breathe into the body and feel your abdomen expanding and contracting slightly with each inhalation and exhalation. So I love that image of just like the belly getting filled and then kind of releasing it.
Yeah, I'm just trying it now.
Right. Mm-hmm. And if you find it easy to visualize, close your eyes and see yourself surrounded by light or immersed in a luminous substance, a sea of consciousness. Then breathe in that light, feel the luminous substance filling up your body and making it luminous also. Then gradually focus more on the feeling. You are now in your body. Don't get attached to any visual image.
I'm attached to the visual image now.
It's because he said don't get attached to the visual image.
I'm attached to it. I love it's like what I'm imagining now is like I'm breathing in this light, and then as I breathe in the light, it makes me brighter.
Yeah.
And I love that image, so that's why I'm attached to it.
Yeah. And that one, I just like the feel of that. Like, I think there's something cool about the air just going deep into your belly.
Yeah.
And then as it goes into your belly, like that's how I find that I feel a bit more tingling in my hands and other areas as well. So, the other one that you mentioned before, that's more like a body scan where you're consciously looking at different parts like your head, your fingers, your knees, your toes. Whereas I kind of like this one nearly as like, it's a real simple one. It's like, okay, even when I'm driving or whatever. So just one into the belly, through the nose.
Dude, I did 3 breaths while you were talking and I feel better already.
Yeah, it's pretty chilled. Like they're nice little resets, right? And like you can do that 100 times throughout the day, right? You get that stressful email from the boss. It's like, all right, let's just breathe into the belly, close our eyes, laugh, and then we'll just type, detaching from the actual emotion of the email, click send, off you go, do a bit more breathing, and that whole situation that might have caused like an hour of mental and emotional pain could potentially be solved in 9 breaths. So it can become a little productivity hack as well. Depending on...
It's still strange in that email from the boss one. You get the email, you take a few breaths to detach from it all.
Yeah.
But the email's still waiting for you there.
Yeah, but what about while you're breathing, you're responding to it, but rather than being fully attached to it, you're just observing it. You're just observing yourself responding to the email, detaching from any animosity, any emotional feeling towards the boss. Like you're more focused on how you're breathing and what's going on in your belly. Like you're more focused on the sounds of the keys while you're typing, the individual words rather than, I'm going to like reply with additional levels of passive aggression. I'm going to get all these feelings of like hate out on paper, so it's more like you're replying as the observer and you're applying as somebody that's just conscious in your own body.
This was in the relationships chapter where he talks about relationships, where he talks about the knowing versus the reacting, right? Whereas when a negative emotion comes up for you, be in the knowing of the reaction, meaning just go, oh, that's interesting. This emotion is coming up for me. Oh, look, it's almost like you say, I'm glad I am aware of this emotion, and now I know that this emotion is here, as opposed to going, I'm going to fight it and react to it and right? So instead of doing that, you just kind of go, oh yeah, I'm aware of this. And I'm grateful that this emotion has come up because it's made me aware of the situation that's in front of me. And instead of diving into it and getting entangled in it, you just kind of just stay in the knowing. And I thought that was a really cool concept of the knowing versus the reacting. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even like, I think another really cool example of that is road rage. You know, like I think when you know, and this is no offense to anyone that experiences levels of road rage, but I think that this type of practice is a great, like road rage is a great thing. If you're somebody that does love their road rage, and if you can't imagine anything worse than getting cut off by somebody while you're driving, like just detaching yourself from that initial emotional reaction of beeping the horn, getting out of your car and punching through their window, trying to process it in a different way might allow that driving experience to be a little bit more peaceful. And if you think about, like the book talks about whether you're being conscious or unconscious, like we have some of, you know, nearly knowing and trying to observe which of my reactions here are a little bit more unconscious and which are conscious, right? Like which I think the book talks about, is this emotion sort of rooted in fear, guilt, resentment, anger, right? They're probably more unconscious reactions versus is this emotional reaction rooted in love, joy, playfulness. They're probably more conscious types of emotions or actions. It's like, how do you then change the filter of how you're viewing that experience, right? Like, is it objectively bad if somebody cuts you off in traffic, or is that something that you can then potentially get past without having to punch them in the face? Who knows? Maybe you don't want to, you know, like that's a very enjoyable part of your day. But if it then causes you pain after that experience, then maybe it's one worth reflecting on a little bit more.
It's very consistent with the Stoics, isn't it?
Yeah.
This book is very consistent. I mean, Stoicism, it's so, there's so many commonalities between that and this book.
Taoism, Buddhism, like I think he references Christianity a lot. Like there's...
Well,
I think a lot of religions are steeped in elevating forms of consciousness, right?
Yeah.
But then at their core, regardless of what you believe in and whether you have a religion or not, those that do follow doctrines, when like, a large number of them are based in, you know, being present, being part of a community, being moral, whatever that may mean. And then obviously sometimes the religions don't get it right, and then they're used on the other end, you know? And like, if you think about when religions get it wrong, usually it's egoic, you know, and it's based on the ego. It's like, all right, somebody's looking for power and control or war, or they want their religion to be the only one or the best one. And then it kind of shifts. So that's when the interpretation maybe changes a little bit.
When you think about religions, most religions have a form of heaven. And if you take what this book is saying and you apply it to the idea of heaven, then it kind of doesn't make sense, because if you start to go, well, I can't wait to get to heaven, that means you're living in the future, and that means you're not present, because the idea that there's a heaven means that the present is hell. If you kind of follow Eckhart's style of thinking. And And that's kind of true though, isn't it? In that if you think the better day is coming, then obviously you'll suffer now because that creates again that gap. Which is kind of like, what the, it's kind of that's interesting in itself, in that a lot of religions promise that, that place we're going to get to where everything's going to be bloody awesome, where you get to eat fried potatoes every day and then not get fat. So it's just, if you think that's real, then all of a sudden you're now, it sucks. And you keep chasing that thing. So it's right. When, in you saying, and whether it's wrong or not, who the hell knows? But it's just an interesting thought process to go through.
Yep.
Yeah. That's why one of the most important things to do is to question things and to be curious, right? It's just.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I think. I think the Dalai Lama talks about that in Buddhism. Like, that's one of the core tenets. It's always about, like, obviously there's some pretty strict rules and guidelines if you're practicing it fully. And again, I'm no expert on Buddhism. I'm not a practiced Buddhist or anything like that. But I just remember in reading one of his books, he's like, a big part of our doctrine is like, you don't cause suffering, you don't hurt other living beings. Like, that's a big part. But then recently, as he's gotten older, he's been recommended as part of his diet that he needs to eat meat, which really goes against that core tenet. But then he's like, but I'm still learning, I'm still evolving, I'm still doing it with balance. I've got gratitude for the animal that I'm eating. But I also know that this is something that I need to nourish my body. So it's like, a lot of people that potentially follow Buddhism or really look up to him might be like, hey, you just conflicted with one of the real core values here where we don't eat meat, but now you're eating meat. But then the whole angle there is, it's still all about learning and adapting and we change. And I think that's kind of cool. Like, when you see religions that have really strong rules, like, actually evolve and then adapt with how the world changes as well, right? Like, some of these religions the core of them were written 2,000, 2,500 years ago.
Yeah.
It's just like science, right? It'd be like saying that when everyone thought, the world was completely, and some people still do think that the world's completely flat, and then that's proven different. It's like, oh, well, are we still using old science for a new world?
Well, it's what we always talk about, right? The reason you and I read, and the reason we encourage each other to keep learning, is because we want to continually update the operating system, right? We don't want to be on Windows 95. We want to be able to update our brain with new information, with new ways of thinking that's going to help us live a more fulfilling life. Whereas I think one of the dangers of never updating the operating system is that you no longer can exist in today's world and be able to use the applications that have just been released. I think there's and this is just in life in general. There's a danger to subscribing to one way of thinking and then never updating your beliefs and values based on new information that has surfaced. I think, and then this book has been that for me, because I think in a way I've been avoiding books like this, and I've been avoiding, I guess, exploring spirituality because I'm afraid of it. And the thing that I was afraid of during this book, I experienced, reading it was exciting, scary, and confronting all at the same time, because I've never really read a book, Ali, that I found really hard to understand. Right? It felt like, it reminded me of when I sat in a physics class and I'd been wagging school for bloody half the term, and then I go to school and then we're on chapter 7 and I just understood nothing. I just looked at the words. I was like, I don't know what the hell's going on here. And that was really uncomfortable for me. I was just super uncomfortable. So I ask you this, being someone who's read this book multiple times. I am creating my own suffering. I know it, dude. I know it to the core. That when I was reading this book, I'm like, my thinking and my overthinking and my obsessive thinking and my addictive thinking is causing me a lot of suffering unnecessarily. So being someone who's practiced a lot of these lessons in the book, what do I do? I mean, I've started detaching myself. I've started to moments where I feel that I go, okay, all right, man, just take a step back. Look at the thoughts, wave goodbye to them. Look at the emotions, wave goodbye to them. Is there anything that we haven't mentioned in this book that you think is important? I mean, there's the questions we ask ourselves. There's the meditation, right? There's also the holistic realization that you are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You're separate to that. You're just the observer of it all. Is there anything we've missed?
I think a couple of parts to that question. Like, what do you do? I think you're doing it right now. Like, it's all a learning journey, right? So just even from hearing you speak throughout this episode, like one of the big things that it speaks about is just awareness. Like the fact that from this book or whatever journey you've been on recently, that as you're now going through, call it the normal thinking process, there'll probably be a voice in the back of your head being like, okay, am I aware of what's going on right now? Am I just running with it? Now, that doesn't mean that you completely solve it, right? Like, and it also depends on what your goals are. Like, as you said earlier, you might not want to let go of the amount of thinking that you're doing or to diminish, the quality of that, because your thinking does serve you for the most part pretty well. So it might just be slight readjustments just to maybe give yourself a little break or to practice a meditation here or there or whatever tools you might choose. But yeah, it's like, I don't think there is one silver bullet solution to these things. It's more around what aligns with you at that moment in time and which bits of the teaching or the lessons you actually want to then implement. Because we were speaking about this earlier, right? One of the hardest things I think about spirituality and meditation and reading these books is just the core of the simplicity of the lessons, right? Like, it's one of the reasons why I think it's been something that's been very hard for people to commercialize. Like when you tell somebody, hey, you just need to take 5 breaths and you're going to feel amazing, or you need to sit with your eyes closed for 20 minutes. There's a lot of simplicity in that, but then practicing that with a lot of awareness is so difficult, and on a consistent basis, because it is potentially boring. It is tedious. It's hard to prioritize the time because of the way that our minds work. Like the amount of times that you'll be like, yep, I'm going to meditate every day for 20 minutes. But then you get a 9 o'clock meeting, or you have to go on a flight, or like something in life just comes across and it's like, I can't prioritize sitting there quietly for 20 minutes. I'm going to get yelled at by my partner. I can't miss a meeting because I want to sit. Like, imagine that. Like, sorry, I can't do a keynote at 10 o'clock because I generally meditate at 10 for 20 minutes. So can you just push that back 20 minutes? Like, so there's probably some practical life situation realities here, but then it just depends on what you then want to implement, I think. And from there, and I think one of the things that I always go back to, and we speak about this, like for me personally, I want to still be very active in the world and engage with quotation marks, life situations. But I just want to improve my level of peace when I'm going through all those moves. Like, I don't want there ever to be a feeling of real like angst or avoid sort of stress. And for me, that generally, like what I've realized over the years, is that comes from when things are really attached to my sense of identity, right? So I think one of the things that we probably haven't dug that deep into is just the concept of the ego. And, in simple terms, that's just how we view ourselves, like how our mind views itself, our identity. Like, say, for example, like things like ego might be like, and ego isn't, I think automatically people think when you use the word ego, it's a bad thing, right? I don't think it is. Like we think of ego as somebody that's being very egotistical and arrogant and all of that. But ego is just the way that we view ourselves, the labels that we put on things, the things that we potentially get attached to, right? So, and I remember going through these exercises, like we might have a level of attachment to Vinh and Ali as podcast hosts, right? Now, all of a sudden, if Apple said, look, your podcast is no good, we're going to cancel you guys. Depending on how attached we were to that identity as podcast hosts, would probably experience different levels of pain. Would be like, oh my God, I've lost my tool that we used to share, or I've lost my identity as a top-ranked podcast host and a teacher, or whatever it is that you're attached to. So then for me, it's always having a healthy level of awareness to the things that we do and the roles that we play, and knowing that they might be temporary, just to enjoy and embrace them. So that's what I'm personally looking for, is just peace in the journey, and then also a healthy level of both attachment and detachment to the things that I do have, the games that I play.
There was this part in the book where the author talks about how he was sitting in just a field and he got himself really present, and then he was looking at a tree and he realized that he's never seen a tree in the way that he's seeing it currently when he was present. And he felt at one with the tree, and he felt at one with the animals that he could see. And he felt like everything was connected and that he was truly present, and almost a feeling of peace, like what you were saying. And there was this magnificent beauty that he experienced in that moment while he was sitting there. And I've never looked at a tree or any animal like that before in my life. And I think that's what I want out of that. I want to be able to experience life like that here and there to start with, just here and there. Yeah. I'm not asking every day to wake up and go, wow, I love this window. I love this chair. I don't know if I'll ever be able to get there. And I don't mean to say it in a mocking way. I do apologize. I know how that just came out. That came out a little bit mocky. It was a little bit mocky. I didn't mean it to be mocky. It's just...
I was thinking about Anchorman. Do you remember the movie Anchorman? Yeah. He's like, I love lamp. Yeah.
But And the reason I even guess the reason why I did it like that is because to me, it's still so surreal to me. But it's just when I read that, I went, how often do I sit there and marvel at the beauty of my son? This beautiful little human, that has his own personality, has his own little quirks, interests, and it's just, we don't. We often seek the phone. We often seek, momentary pleasures because we're trying to escape the present. Whereas, again, just the realization that the present is all we have. I'm trying to take away from this, brother. I know you're trying to find peace in the moment. What I'm trying to find in the moment is more beauty. To sit in the beauty and actually take it in. Whereas, I know this is going to be a challenging road for me moving forward. And now that I'm aware of it, it's freaking me out because now I know. Whereas when you didn't know, you're oblivious to it.
Yeah.
But now I know. And I think, like you said, the first step for me really is awareness of it. And you're right. You've helped me zone in on just that one word, and it's awareness. Just catch yourself out. When you're reaching for that mind and trying to engage in it so you can, you can feel that sense of excitement, just take a step back. Be present. Try to enjoy the beauty that's in front of you.
That's cool. Even when you were saying awareness, I think the other, like before you mentioned peace and beauty sort of going in there. When you were saying awareness, I think the word acceptance also comes up. It's like maybe just accepting it for what it is. Like when you are in that thinking mind, even if you have a level of acceptance while you're going through that, it just might give that feeling of, okay, well, I've still got kind of control over the way that I'm experiencing this, by acceptance. Like I'm not just getting dragged around. If that's a feeling that you're feeling.
Yeah. No, I definitely think that will help. Going down the accepting route. And now as I'm reflecting on it even more, what's really interesting, bro, is that I've been trying to use the toolkits of an entrepreneur to fix a lot of my unhappiness in my life. And it's funny because the toolkits of an entrepreneur that has allowed me to build what I've built is inadequate to be able to fix some of these other problems that I'm experiencing. It's the old, and it's crazy. I don't know how I've survived this long without some of the most basic tools in spirituality. But it's like I didn't even have a screwdriver. And that's, this feels like such a core tool to have to navigate life. But then also my other thoughts that I'm kind of just observing is that most people don't achieve or go deep down the path of spirituality until they get older. So as much as I think it's a basic tool that I need, it's a tool that most people don't develop until they're much older. It seems like as simple as it sounds, it does seem like it's a more complicated tool. And a quick note on that. I had a quick thought I wanted to share with everyone, and it's a really interesting thing. And I know I've talked about this before, but I want to just repeat it again, in that when I show people a piece of magic, and again, for those of you who don't know me, I am part magician. I'm not just talking about woo-woo here, but I do sleight of hand to someone. And when I do sleight of hand, it's just, at this point they go, wow, does he actually think he's a wizard?
That this book really changed your life.
Yeah. Just when I do my magic powers, but when I show someone a trick and then I ask them how it's done, people immediately assume complexity. And I believe that as human beings, we are drawn to complexity because we can use complexity as an excuse for not doing something. Because if you think, again, that you achieving your dreams is really complex, and if it's really complex, then that's an excuse you can use. Well, it's too hard. I would do that, but it's too hard. I would quit my job and then start this thing, but no, it's too hard. So we can lean on complexity as an excuse. And I think that's why spirituality is so difficult, because we fall for the same trap. We look at it and go, it's so complex. It's too hard. And we tend to attach complexity with effectiveness. We like it when you give us like 8 steps to, or 14 or 15 steps to how to build a business. We go, oh yeah, that's value. I'm getting 15 steps. It's good. Whereas when it's simple as just take 5 deep breaths and focus on your breath, you go, no, get out of here, man. What kind of snake oil is this?
Yeah. Make more sales. Yeah.
Well, that's right. And dude, you know what's crazy? I've been in the speaking industry now for I've been doing it since 2014 professionally. And one of the first pieces of advice I got from a speaker at the time, I was so offended when he told me this piece of advice. I was like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Because I said to him, hey, how do I get more speaking gigs? And all he said was, speak more. If you want to speak more, then go out there and speak more. And I thought, wow, thanks, man. This was a great coffee session. And it just felt like
I'm not paying for coffee anymore.
It just felt like the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. I walked away from that and I was like, wow, I guess some people just are born stupid. Well, anyway, not going to have that person in my circle of friends. But this is just one of those things again. And he was so right. He was so right that we overcomplicate things. And as a result of overcomplication, we don't begin the journey. We just don't take action. We don't take those 5 breaths.
Yeah.
Because when I look back on my career now, how did I achieve success as a keynote speaker? I just got out there and I spoke more. And the more I got out there and the more I started to speak, the more speaking gigs I started to get. That's it.
Yeah. Simplicity in the message.
Bloody oath. No. It's crazy, isn't it? Life isn't that complicated. We just make it more complicated because we get addicted to thinking. It's a bloody.
But even when you're talking about your sort of journey into this space, funnily enough, I think just naturally you embody a lot of these things anyway. Like just as somebody that knows you quite well, you go through the process of teaching, generosity, authentic messaging. Like there's so much already in your world where you probably are embedding these things. So the bridge to whatever the next level is, just for you as an individual, I think it might feel very far away, but
it does.
I don't think it maybe is that far away. Just as a little outside observer looking in, if that's something you want to actually do more of.
No, I do. I definitely want to go down this path a little further. I'll be very open to, maybe 5 podcasts down the track, going for another book like this. Just give me a little bit of space. I need a little bit of time because again, you threw me into this one. Again, frightening, exciting, all at the same time. Very strange. I mean, what I do want to explore though is how being more present, how that's going to help me in the creative process. Because like I said to you, I've been umming and ahhing about getting an office space in my life, and I've been working from home, entrepreneur, which we stay lean as possible, etc. But I'm starting to get to that point in my life now where my business and my own home, I'm outgrowing all of that now, and I'm very interested in the creative process, and I'm really curious about how being more present allows you to tap into that creativity more. There's something there, because there was a passage that the author wrote that really made me go, huh? And I noted it and put lots of stars next to it. And I wrote, and this is what the author said. He said, all true artists, whether they know it or not, create from a place of no mind, from inner stillness. The mind then gives form to the creative impulse or insight. Now, I never thought about being more present as a portal to be able to access more creativity. Never thought of that. I thought more thinking and better quality thinking leads to more creativity. So I've never looked at it from, no, creativity could also, part of creativity could also come from a place of no mind. And I've never explored it. It's one of those things where I've never explored it, never tried it. Very interested to see how that's going to help me in the creative process.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That'll be pretty cool. Like, obviously you already create at a very high quality and standard. So it'll be interesting to see if you embed some of these tools and tactics, if it does make any changes to your process. This is another one we can reflect on in 5 episodes time. Be like, if you create anything, you're like, nah, I just sat there with my eyes closed for 4 hours and nothing really came up.
And the result of it was just a steamed bland potato. That was all I got out of it. A crappy little old steamed baked potato.
Well, we'll dig into that a little bit deeper though. Like, I think there's a lot of other books, like just when you were saying that, I was thinking about the book Thinking Fast and Slow.
Where System 1 and 2 thinking.
System 1 and 2 thinking, right? System 1 is just reactive type of thinking, like 2 + 2 is 4. And then system 2 is where you go a little bit deeper and solve like the equivalent of algebraic equations, where you have to take time and additional levels of depth to come to the solution. Like, I feel like there might be, say if a lot of, and I don't know your sort of creative process, so you might already be going into that system 2 a fair bit. Whether this helps you get even deeper into system 2, or if you are often stuck in system 1, does concepts like meditation or changing your environment, allocating more time in a flow state, allow you to do that more often? Be really interesting.
Well,
how that plays out.
The reason why that piqued my interest this time is because literally just this week, and this happens to me all the time, I've got these random notes in my phone because I always tell my phone, take a note for me. And I'll read you one that I did just the other day in the car, and I've got so many of these. Where is it? Let me just bring it up. And okay. And this just came to me, and I felt like this was a really profound thing for me. And it's that people with EQ can talk to people's hearts. People with IQ talk to people's brains. A balance of both is important. Now, I've always understood the importance of EQ and IQ, but I've never made the connection between people who've got good emotional intelligence can talk directly to people's hearts. Whereas people who've got good IQ can talk straight to your brain. So, and those little ideas and little nuggets for me, they don't occur when I'm really thinking about it. They come to me in the moments when I'm driving, while I'm driving. And while I'm driving, but for me, when I'm driving, I that's when I go into those trance-like states when I'm driving alone, where I just know, all right, I'm taking the dogs down to the wash. I'm going to wash the dogs. And I purposely now don't turn any music on, don't turn any podcasts on, nothing. Because I'm trying to get into that nothingness. And in that nothingness, these things happen. These weird things happen to me all the time. And that's why I've been trying to tap into that nothingness state a lot more often these days.
Yep.
And that's why when I read the no mind thing, that really connected with nothingness. I went, yeah. That no mind thing is where I've been able to connect things I normally have never been able to connect before. Or when you wake up in the middle of the night and you go, oh, that's such a good idea, and then you type it down. Those things happen quite often for me.
For sure. I can't remember where I heard it or read it, but it was nearly like a thinking type of meditation, which is quite funny. It goes nearly against what the whole point of meditation is. But
sounds like my kind of jam.
Yeah, this sounds like your kind of jam. But say you've got a situation or a problem, you nearly use the meditative technique of closing your eyes for 20 minutes, but you jam on that one question, right? So, I don't know, you might be creating a new module for your upcoming keynote on a certain topic, rather than just sitting there and just writing notes and really trying to figure it out. You have the notepad sitting next to you, but your eyes are closed for 20 minutes as you're just focusing on that problem, and you're nearly waiting for thoughts to come up from the subconscious to then help you solve that problem, right? And I think this also comes from how maybe it was like Thomas Edison and a few scientists used to create like this. Like I think Edison had this tool where he would sit on a chair and he would hold like a watch or something in his hand, and then when he was trying to create an invention or solve another experiment or problem, just when he was about to fall asleep, he thought that that's where the real big insight would come. So just when he was about to fall asleep, his hand would obviously get relaxed, the watch would drop, and then it would wake him up, but then he would get the insight, and then he would then go create from that position. So
that's consistent.
It's like using different...
Yeah, so sorry, go ahead.
No, that was it. Sorry.
Oh, that's consistent with what the world of neuroscience discovered, in that when you are really tired, the logic center of your brain shuts down, which then allows the other parts of your brain to make connections that are not logical. And that's why and I remember I watched this on TV where they did a study where they got a bunch of people, they got them really tired. And that's when they were the most creative, because that's when the logic center is shut. Because when you are logical, it's very difficult to be creative. Creativity is almost the opposite of logic. And our brain stops us from being logical. So that sounds like that is a version of that.
Yeah.
And that's something I've also not explored, because I love doing things in the morning when my brain is the most active. And I think that's been one of the biggest barriers to me being creative, is I'm trying to access creativity from the mind that has captured me hostage. And it's like you're squeezing so hard, but nothing, like you just get a little drop comes out and you're like, oh man, all of that cognitive strain for that sucks. So I reckon I've been approaching creativity in the wrong bloody way. Yeah, man, I've gotten a lot out of this podcast. I don't know if anybody else has, but far out, I've learned a lot.
You also do like, I've sort of had a glimpse into your world over the last couple of weeks, and I've watched you create. You create with a very high level of intensity too, right?
Yeah,
like when you're creating work, I think that's also potentially a superpower of yours, is that you will sit with a problem or a topic and you do jam on it for 2-3 hours, which I haven't really seen too many people do. So there might be just different ways, right? Like you might have your driving in the car version where you get insight. Then there might be the sit with the notepad version. There might be the meditate version. And then you might get different types of creativity through this. Now, look, I'm talking from someone that doesn't know that well, but
it
sounds like you've got different tools already.
Yeah, and what we should give people context on is that, Ali came over and spent 3-4 days with me, and we were just creating, and it was just nice to be able to sit and create and refine. And we're creating and refining our process for a program we call Recalibrate, which is to help you recalibrate your values, recalibrate who you are, so that the actions you take moving forward in your life are consistent with who you currently are. Right. So you build a life based on who you currently are, as opposed to building a life based on who you previously were. And Ali got to get a taste of how I create. And I felt so bad as well, because after 2 days of sitting down for 12 to 14 hours a day, intensely nonstop jamming on topics and refining, we walked outside and Ali said, "Oh, wow, the place where you live is really nice, Vin. There's a really nice park across the road." And I never took him for a walk. I didn't even let him outside of the house, and I felt so bad.
It was nice. It was nice getting some fresh air after 48 hours locked inside.
Yeah. What you've helped remind me is that I'm a terrible person, and that I also, what this book has helped me realize, I think ultimately, is that there are so many different ways to access the now.
But
there are so
I
many
want to go
different
back to
ways
that
to access
example though.
creativity. Yeah.
Before you move on from that example, for me, it was the flip side because I got very good at just making the intuitive, like what I would call just the lowest hanging fruit type of decision, right? So to be like, okay, I'll put it through my processing. It's like, how does this feel? Feels good. Let's go do it and let's see where it lands, And that was really cool to sort of step into your world and then be like, okay, this is what it looks like when you really dig into something and you go past that point of discomfort where your brain's saying, we might be getting diminishing returns here because there's no point. Like we already think we've got the core of the concept here. Let's just go do it and then see where it lands. Now, what I was starting to realize that might work every now and again, but you might also end up with, call it 6 to 8 out of 10s. Whereas your process was really cool to see that, okay, when you sit with things for a little bit longer and you get past that point of discomfort, like not going outside for 2 days, you actually you do unlock cool things at a different level that I hadn't experienced yet. So again, what we're talking about here is that there's just different ways to approach certain things. Like you might have ones where sometimes you don't need to be in gear number 6. You can be in gear number 1 and 2 and see what comes up. Sometimes you can be in gear number 4. Sometimes you need to go into gear number 6. And it was really cool just being part of that creative process. Because even for other things outside of what we were creating, I've also then started implementing more of your thinking rather than just going,
really,
if we'll call it the more efficient route. Yeah. Just looking at if I sit with this for a bit longer, what does it then look like? Whereas usually I make decisions pretty quickly, move forward, and then just build a parachute while we're falling, which is again a very entrepreneurial trait, I think. But then now also saying, okay, well, if you really try to color in as much as you can, it might actually unlock more insight rather than just
I think that's why
effectiveness and efficiency.
I think the clarity as well that I've realized about our friendship and you as well is that you are definitely more entrepreneur than me, whereas I have two parts of me that fight all the time, and it's the artist component of who I am, and it's the entrepreneur in me. So I've got an artist in me and an entrepreneur, and they're always at battle, right? Because the artist, if I always just think as an artist, I'll never release anything that I do. And if I always think as an entrepreneur, I feel sometimes I release things too quickly. And that balance for me, I think has been a big core in some of the success that I've had in my life, is learning to balance that. And again, still to bring it back to this book, I think the most clear lesson that I'm getting from this is that in practicing being more present, I'm going to be able to master the mind and not have it master me. That is the clearest takeaway that I'm taking from this right now, is that at moments during the day, practicing being more present, that's going to help me master my mind and not have it just take me for joyrides. Because for a long time in my life, brother, it's taken me on rides that I do not want to go on. I don't want to be living so far ahead in the future that I'm not seeing the beauty in the interactions that I'm currently having with my wife or my son or nature. It's far out. I think if I didn't come across this book now and I didn't study it and will continue to study it and hopefully have you hold me accountable, I reckon, again, I just know I'm one of those characters that would have gotten to the end and be like, no, this can't be the end. No. Oh, damn it. I was going to live tomorrow. Ah, shit. Now I'm dead. Oh, well. It's good game. I think it's, yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Very
no,
cool.
Thanks. It's how about you? What's your biggest takeaway? I guess having gone through this so many times, what did you take away from it this time?
There's so much that always comes up in this book, but I think for me it was just the reminder to practice components from this and reintegrate it. So I think, for me, it was nearly the equivalent of when you've been going to the gym for a little while and then you're like, oh, I don't need to go that often. It's fine. We're pretty good. But then you realize, oh, wow, it actually feels pretty good when you get back into the gym. And I think for me, this is like one of many other tools, but call it the gym for the mind and the soul a little bit, where it was just a reminder, like just those little things, like just, you touched on it before, just trying to increase the quality of experiences. I think that was a real big thing that came up. Like I think I've just lost a little bit of balance between, call it the internal and the external world. Like I've really tried to amplify a lot more in the external world, especially over the last few months. But then sometimes the quality while experiencing some of those cool things in the external world just hasn't been that high. So I go back to, okay, how good is the quality of, like that's a big word that just keeps sticking, or a sentence that keeps sticking out for me is, what's the quality of my consciousness right now? Right? Like, is there any cloudiness? Is there any weight? Is there any murkiness? Is there something that I'm not really addressing? Am I holding on to something that I don't need to hold on to? Like the other word that I probably highlighted a lot while reading this book the second time around was this surrender. And it's like, okay, well, is there anything here that I just need to surrender a little bit more to enjoy it more, or to embrace that moment at a high standard? So that was my big sensitivity, was just, say if I had a rating scale on how I was experiencing the now, still pretty good, but it wasn't optimized. So it's just like, all right, how do you make a bit of a tune up? It felt like getting a car serviced. It's like, okay, I haven't serviced this vehicle for a while. I need to go and service it.
Wow. I mean, good for you. I mean, I read this book and went, I've never serviced my car. It's going to break down any moment. I could die right now. It just freaked me out, man.
But I think that's beautiful, though. Like, sometimes with these things, when you've been nearly so-called practicing them for a while, they also lose their perceived impact. Right. So you nearly go the other way. You know what I mean? It's like when you're nearly too close to something, or you feel like your brain feels like it already knows something. It's like if you eat the only thing you eat is vegetables every single day. Is it still healthy for you? Like there's maybe no balance in there. So I think we're just looking at it from different views, but the goal's still very similar. Like if you think about both of what we're talking about here, is how do we increase the quality of moments is what it feels like. Like, and I think even I was thinking about when we do this podcast, we always leave it and we're like, how good was that? Like we always, not like how good was the actual podcast. It's more, how good was it us spending 2 hours just chatting and talking about something that we learned? Because I think this is one of those things that we do in the external world where we bring a very good internal quality, right? Like we're present for these 2 hours. We're engaged, we're talking. Like I think, call it that level of consciousness. It feels relatively high. Whereas then we'll stop the podcast and we'll go into the normal world and we'll have other things on, and then maybe our brain will be taking us for a ride. But right now, for these last 2 hours, we've just been like, this is nearly like a type of meditation for us, right? Yeah. We're sitting here, we're chatting, we're solving potential things that we're thinking about. It's nearly like our therapy session, and we share it with other people. So it's very cool.
And I guess in concluding this episode as well, I just want to encourage our listeners that the practical toolkit of solving it, accepting it, or just leaving it, I think is a very cool toolkit to run through your current problems that you're experiencing right now. And I think one of the most powerful things you can do is, and I've done this in my journal, is just kind of wrote down the top 3 things that I'm going through that's causing a lot of conflict in my life and consuming my mind a lot and getting into that state of So I kind of look at these top 3 things and I just go, well, what am I going to do? How am I going to act on it in the now? Am I solving it? Am I leaving it? Or am I just going to accept it? And once you can kind of give it that conclusive decision in the present, it just frees up your mind to be able to be in the now. Let's not leave things unresolved, because it amplifies things, and start just chipping away at them and just applying the simple 3 steps.
Yep, for sure. And then my one would be practical, is Just check in with yourself. Can you feel the breath going into your belly? Can you feel tingling in your hands? And maybe even make notes. Like can you do that 10 times a day, 20 times a day, 50 times a day, where you just check in and see if you can break your record if you like games.
Well, this is the first time that you've said that, and I didn't think you were a bloody weirdo, because you've said that to me multiple times before I've read this book. And I used to say, how's your day, man? And you used to say to me, oh man, I didn't feel the tingles in my fingers today, and my breath wasn't right. And I used to be like, this guy is such an idiot. Why are you focusing on your breath and your tingles, mate? What kind of world do you live in? Unicorn and fairies? I've honestly, inside, I used to think that a lot every time you told me that.
Yeah,
well, this is the first time I've heard you say that.
No, they used to verbalize it to me too. Yeah, I did. You didn't just think it.
I was like, man, lucky you today. I didn't feel tingles and I didn't breathe right. I had a very hectic day today at work.
And when you would attack me like that, I'd just smile at you and I'd focus on the tingling in my fingers and the breath in the belly, and I'd be like...
You were observing your thoughts, right?
I was trying to observe my thoughts and crying a little bit.
Yeah. Why am I friends with this guy?
Why is he so mean?
Well, look, everyone, we just want to thank you for being a part of our podcast tribe, and thanks for listening. Thanks for learning out loud with us, and thanks for accepting us for who we are, because my goodness, I don't know how you deal with listening to these podcasts. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for tuning in for this episode. Take care. We'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.